Hi everyone and welcome to the internet. So what we're going to be doing in today's lesson is having a look at the process of mitosis. So hopefully by the end of this lesson you're going to be able to describe mitosis and explain the different stages of it. To start us off though, we've got a couple of questions to review the work we've done previously, so have a go answering those two questions in your book for me. I'm just going to give you a couple of minutes to do that. So let's check those answers then. For the first one, when we're looking at the difference between diffusion and active transport, then the key things are, first of all, diffusion is moving from an area of high concentration to an area of low concentration, whereas active transport is from an area of low concentration to an area of high concentration. And we could also have commented on the fact that diffusion is a passive process, so one that doesn't require any energy, whereas active transport is an active process, which means it does require energy. For number two examples, you can pick any two from these. You could have said about glucose in our digestive system or small intestine. You could have said sodium and potassium ions in nerve cells. And you could have said minerals in plant roots. So give yourself a tick for each of those two examples that you got right, and give yourself a tick if you managed to identify one of those differences between diffusion and active transport. Then give yourself a score out of 3 in your books for me. So first thing I'd like you to do then is just in your books write me an answer to this question. What has to happen for a cut to heal? So I'm just going to give you a minute to get your answers written down for that. Hopefully the key point that we've got written down is the fact that new cells have to be made to replace those that were either lost or damaged in that injury. So if you've got something about new cells being made, give yourself a tick for that. Now, some of you might have gone into a lot more detail talking about blood clots and scabs and things like this, but we're not really going to look at that in any real detail until we come on to B6. So that will be part of this, but we're not going to look at that today. So when we're talking about the process of mitosis, this is how we can make new cells. Now, what we've got to have is some kind of ability in our body for body cells to divide. And the reason that we've got to have body cells capable of division is so that they can firstly repair damaged tissue, secondly replace any worn out cells, and finally allow organisms to grow. Because in order to grow, obviously what we need are more cells to make up the larger bodies, for example. So make sure you've got those points written down in your books as to why our body cells need to be able to divide. So when it actually comes to the exact process by which these body cells are going to divide, we're talking about mitosis. Now, one thing I'm going to say here is please be really careful with your spelling, because we're going to come on to have a look at another process by which cells can divide later on, which is rather similar. And one of the things that I have seen over the years in marking these exam papers is a lot of students like to merge these two processes into one weird mutant process. So spelling counts. And one of the guidance points that we've had on previous mark schemes was that the T in mitosis is critical to you getting the mark. So mitosis, M-I-T-O-S-I-S, make sure you know how to spell it, and this is the process by which body cells divide. And a nice easy way to remember it is that mitosis happens in mitoses. So a nice little way that you can just have a rhyme to help you remember this, that body cells will divide by mitosis. So make sure you've got that written down if you haven't already. One of the really important points about mitosis is that when we're producing these new body cells, then they're what we refer to as clones. Now, a clone is something that is genetically identical. So what we're actually producing here is from our one parent cell, we are going to produce two genetically identical daughter cells. So again, make sure you've got those points written down in your books for me. what we need to do now then is go a bit deeper. We can't just leave it that mitosis makes two genetically identical daughter cells and not understand exactly how that happens. So what we're going to do in this next part is to really look to see what is happening at each stage of this process. Now, what we're actually going to be talking about is something called the cell cycle. And this is the process of cell growth and division. So the whole thing about the growth of cells and their division is called the cell cycle. And we can divide it up into 4 key stages. So we've got the DNA replication, we've got movement of our chromosomes, we have cytokinesis, and then we've got growth phases. So make sure you've got those points written down for me. I'll leave that up there for about another minute and a half. One of the things I have seen on a previous exam paper is that they've given you this style of diagram of the cell cycle. So what we've got is basically a circle that we've then divided up into the different sections to represent those different phases. So what we've actually got then, if we start with the big yellow one on the right hand side, the S phase, that's where we're replicating the DNA. Then we're going to come into a G phase, in this case G2, which is a growth phase. And then we go into the mitosis phase. So that's the actual division part. And you can see that in there we've also got that bit I've just said, cytokinesis. Then we come into our G1, another growth phase, and then it comes back around. It's a cycle, so it just keeps going round and round. So we've got obviously the DNA replication, then we have growth where it's preparing for mitosis, we have mitosis with cytokinesis, and then we go back into the growth phase again. I would suggest you get a little sketch of that done in your books. You don't have to know the different names of the stages in mitosis for GCSE. You will if you go onto A-level biology, and if you want to learn it, feel free, but you only need to know mitosis and then the cytokinesis, growth, and DNA replication. Those are the names you need to know. You don't need to memorize prophase, metaphase, anaphase, and telophase. So I'll leave this up for another minute so you've got a chance to get a little sketch of this. Obviously, if you need longer, feel free to pause the video. let's look at the DNA replication part in detail. So what we've got here is the double helix strand of DNA that's been unzipped. So we've got the two strands with those nucleotide bases exposed. What we see is those complementary bases come in and pair up. So A's with T's, C's with G's. And as they do so, we then form a link between them to make that new DNA strand. So we're going to end up with an identical copy. So what I'd like you to do then is, in your books, explain the process of DNA replication. So you can use diagrams if you want to, and then have a go at the second question there, explaining why the chromosomes are copied before the cell divides. So I'm going to give you about 4 minutes to get this done. So explain the process of DNA replication, and then explain why the chromosomes are copied before the cell divides. Next thing, let's have a look at the process of mitosis. So this is our typical animal cell. You can see the main parts there. Now, the first thing that we're actually going to see happening during mitosis is that the nucleus is going to break down. So what we see happening, the nucleus breaks down, reveals the DNA that's there, and that starts to condense to make the chromosomes. So when we've actually formed the chromosomes, we then form this structure called a spindle, and those chromosomes then line up along the center of the cell called the equator on the spindle fibers. So there they are, all lined up along the equator of our cell. What we then see is those spindle fibers contract and they pull the chromosome apart into the individual chromatids that are then pulled to the opposite poles of the cells. So we then have half of them on one side, half on the other side of the cell. The next thing that happens is the cell is then going to form a new nucleus around those two sets of chromosomes, and then what we see is the cell will begin to divide. So the way that this cell division occurs is that the actual cell membrane pinches in and then it will form two separate cells. So here we go, it's pinching in to form those two distinct cells, and those cells will then obviously go on to grow to become fully sized, and then it restarts again. So what I'd like you to do then is explain the movement of these chromosomes. So you've seen it in the animation, and what I've given you on the screen here are little pictures just to represent those different stages we talked about. So obviously write an explanation about what's happening at each stage, and I would suggest you include diagrams in your answer, because they could very well give you one of those diagrams, for example, and ask you to explain what's happening, or they could just ask you to explain the entire process of mitosis. So I'd suggest we do those diagrams, write your explanations in your book, and I'm going to give you about 5 minutes to do this. If you think you're going to need longer, obviously hit pause and give yourself as much time as you need. So that last part, where we're actually dividing into those two cells, is a part of the process called cytokinesis. So we're splitting the cell. Now to do that, as we said, the cell membrane pinches in, and that means those two daughter cells are split from each other. And then, as we saw in that initial diagram of the cell cycle, after the mitosis and cytokinesis part, the cells will grow. So once they're fully grown, the cell cycle starts again. DNA synthesis, mitosis, cytokinesis, growth, just in that endless little loop. So just to finish off for today, we've got our plenary questions. So if your target grades are up to a grade 5, it's the 2 columns on the left. If your target grade is over a grade 5, it's the 2 columns on the right. So get those answers in your books for me. What I'd like you to do today is I'm only going to leave this up for about 30 more seconds. So I would recommend that you hit pause on the video so you've got a chance to properly answer these questions. As always, you can find the answers to the plenary over on my website, sciencewright.weebly.com. You'll also be able to find that under the Internet tab. Just select the week that we're in, and then you'll be able to find things like the lesson PowerPoints, the answers to the plenary, any additional work, and if there's any little experiments I thought you could do at home, then they're there too. So have a look and get using that.